91 FM. BBC Radio 2.
It's Richard Allenson on Radio 2 with the latest programme in the record producers. And along with Steve Levine this evening, we're looking at one of the most successful UK teams ever, Stock, Aitken and Waterman. Their sound defined British pop in the late 80s and early 90s, whilst the working methods of this complete mini-industry of writers, producers, studios and record label was modelled on an American company set up over 20 years earlier. To put their achievements into perspective, we should take a look at how their careers in music began. Pete Waterman came into the record industry as a fan, having started collecting R&B singles in the late 50s. He worked in a record shop during the day and played them as a DJ at night. He was fascinated by the information on the record label, the details of the writers and the producers, and he noticed the same names appearing time and again on a number of the songs he loved. Eddie Holland, Lamont Dozier and Brian Holland.
To me, I'd missed the great Motown period. I mean, I hadn't as a DJ, because that's how I made my money. That's what I did. You know, everybody knew that if you wanted to hear Motown, you went to Pete Waterman. I sort of saw the writing on the wall when Motown moved from Detroit down to Los Angeles. I saw the records were changing. To me, Gamble and Huff were making these records that were like Holland, Dozier and Holland. They were street records. They were about love. They were young people singing. I thought, I'll watch this. And so at some point you say to yourself, I can't talk about this, I've got to go and do it. So you literally think, well, the only way to really do this is to turn up on their door with an airline ticket and say I'm here to work.
Call it youthful enthusiasm or plain audacity, but that's what he did. Within hours of arriving at their Philadelphia headquarters, he was sitting in the studio listening to Tom Bell put the strings on the Stylistics' You Make Me Feel Brand New. He joined them just as Gamble and Huff Productions began to explode. It seemed as if everything coming out of Philly was a hit. And as a reward for the time he spent there, Kenny and Leon paid for Pete to go on holiday to Jamaica.
You can't go to Jamaica without going to Dynamic Studios. I mean, that just don't happen. And Lee Perry was in the studio. He was doing some tracks, and with Gladstone Anders, Peter Tosh and everybody. When I was in Philadelphia, the big hit that wasn't on, it was nothing to do with this, but I loved it, was Millie Jackson, Hurt So Good. And so I'd got it, and I played it Lee Perry. And so he said he'd do a reggae version, and he did, and got the skill to sing it. So I came back to England with this reggae record by a girl called Susan Cadogan.
And on his return, Pete was offered a job with Magnet Records, owned by Michael Levy. But unimpressed with the roster of artists led by Alvin Stardust, Pete suggested to Michael that the song he'd brought back from Jamaica could be a hit.
It was a brilliant move, because what he said was, I tell you what, I'll buy it, I'll give you a deal, you make this a hit, you get a job. This is a miss, you never darken my door or the record industry's ever again in your life. And that was it.
Don't you know that it hurts so? Don't you know that it hurts so? It hurts so good.
Hurt So Good spent 3 months on the chart and reached the top 5 in the spring of 1975. Pete Waterman got his job at Magnet and worked with a variety of acts from Silver Convention to Chris Rea before leaving the label for MCA Music. But whilst Pete was carving out a career in the record industry, Mike Stock and Matt Aitken were both making a living as musicians, and their paths crossed when Mike needed to fill a hole in his group.
In my band, we covered all the Chic numbers because they were great to get people dancing. So that's what first impressed me with Matt, because I was playing the Royal Gardens in Kensington that evening, lost my guitarist the night before. Matt sort of came along for an audition. And if you remember Taste of Honey and Boogie Oogie, the bass line on that, I was playing bass, but there's a nifty guitar part. I said, Matt, can you play along with this? And he knew it anyway, and picked it up immediately, all the stuff we were doing, and then he played all the Chic stuff, and it was fantastic. You know, he slotted in, but I think as he was a pro, he was on cruise ships and stuff, so earning his keep that way. So I think most pros could do it, and he didn't often get that.
We had a production company before we met Pete. It was a very low-key thing. We had a 24-track studio. It was the worst possible equipment. But naively, we believed that we had the ability to sort of become famous through it, whether it was as artists or writers or producers. And at that time, what we would do is record the charts on a Sunday and come in on the Monday with the cassette. And we'd listen to whichever there was the best entry on the top 10, and we'd go, ooh, we like the sounds on that, and we'd sort of rush off and try and make a record that sounded like that.
Mike and Pete's paths crossed in the very early 80s, of which more in just a moment. But before the Stock, Aitken and Waterman partnership truly got underway, Pete was enjoying success working with the producer Peter Collins. When one of their biggest hits, Musical Youth's Past the Dutchie, became a top 10 single in America, it brought Pete into contact with one of his greatest musical heroes, Lamont Dozier. The Motown songwriter and producer wanted to meet the men behind the reggae hit. Dozier's music had been overlooked by the public in the late 1970s and the early 80s, but Pete recognized that this prolific songwriter was still able to write hits. So he paid for Lamont and his family to fly back to England and work with him in London, where he not only organized recording sessions for Dozier, but also helped place his songs with artists, the most successful of which being Invisible for Alison Moyet. So whilst Pete might not have been a musician himself, it was his knack of marrying songs with artists, creating ideas, and the ability to motivate people that proved his own real strength. But how did the trio of Stock, Aitken and Waterman finally get together? Mike Stock.
I'd written a song for Citizens band Radio Freaks, who just liked that kind of thing, and I sold 7,000 copies to their club. And Pete Waterman got to hear the track. So in 1980, he got Peter Collins, who was his producer at the time, and so that's when I first met Pete.
I'd met him as Chris Britton, and I worked with Mike Stock, with Peter Collins. We made the worst record Peter and I have ever made. And the reason was I couldn't understand. I now understand that Mike Stock was so talented. We were trying to turn somebody who was very pop, more pop, and it didn't work.
He liked the songs I'd written. He'd heard a couple more and had tried to contact me because Matt and I teamed up in 1980 and played in my band. So finally in 84, Pete had already understood that I was a writer.
And I kid you not, he was the only person that had ever called me, so I'm taking the call, right? I mean, at least he got my phone number. This is an up movement. And he came down with Matt Aitken.
What actually happened was we went to him, we had a chat, and we played this song that we'd done. It was this track, The Upstroke, which was sort of really wacky and off the wall, I think. He let it get to the second chorus, bless him, and he sort of stopped that on the cassette. And then he reached down and he bought this 12-inch of the SOS band out, and he had a little deck on his thing, and he said, tell me why I like this. Of course, we'd heard it before. I think we used to play in our band. Well, we said, what do you mean? And he said, well, it moves me. What moves me about it? And we said, well, it's got a very persistent but slow beat. It's menacing. And then he played our track again. And then he reached down and he got the 12-inch of Relax out and put that on. And he said, have you heard this? And we said, yeah. And he said, can you make your track sound like this? And we said, yes. And he said, you seem very confident. And we said, well, we are. The original version we did was like Relax, and we then changed it, and the version he had was something completely different. So I think he was on the back foot because of our sort of audacity. And we said, yeah, no, we can make it like that, no problem at all. And talked variously about other things. Then he said, well, why don't we give it a go and knock up a version in the studio, in a proper studio.
Pete would block book the Marquee studio to work on projects, and during the times that it was free, he'd hire it out for others to use. Engineer Phil Harding.
Well, I first met Pete Waterman when he was working with Peter Collins, and we used to do a lot of that at the Marquee studios, and that would have been throughout the late 70s, early 80s. And then there was a period after the two Petes split where Pete and Lamont Dozier were working together at the Marquee, and by 83, moving into 84, I think throughout 83, Pete had met Mike Stock and Matt Aitken and had moved out of the Stiff offices where he was, and for a period actually had an office at the Marquee studios as well. The first series of records were done at the Marquee. Divine, Hazeldean, some of those early high-energy things.
Matt Aitken considers their work with Hazeldean as the first that made use of the emerging technology of the 1980s. They were aware of Kraftwerk, Tomita and others that had used synthesizers before them, but they now wanted to make records where there wasn't an identifiable sound on it, but what you got was energy. And it was their work with Hazeldean that brought them to the attention of a Liverpool band looking for producers for their latest album, Dead or Alive. Steve, while Spin Me Round was written by Dead or Alive, the production is pure Stock Aitken and Waterman. And I suppose it could be argued this single was the one that cemented the careers of both the band and the production team.
Well, that's right. It was a major change of technology, and Matt particularly remembers the Lin 9000 as a turning point in his equipment purchases.
What's the Lin 9000?
Well, the Lin 9000 was the third generation of the Lin drum. What had happened with the Lin 9000 was this became a MIDI production centre, i.e. you could do the drums and some of the keyboard parts within one box, but the computer will tighten up your playing. So by way of an example, I've set up how you record both a drum part and bass and some keyboard parts in the Lin 9000, just to show an example of actually how you do it. So what you do is you start with a click track, and I play against the click track. So this is roughly the tempo of Spin Me Round. So you hear the click, and I'll start by playing the bass drum and snare drum. Here we go. Two very distinctive sounds that the Lin 9000 had in its factory sound set. This very tight hi-hat sound and a very identifiable clap sound. Now you can hear that I've played that in roughly right. It's not very tight. Now, when I press quantize, it now tightens it up. So here's an example of just what I played, but much, much tighter against the click.
So this is the Lin 9000 playing your part?
That's right. It's the drum track that I've just programmed, or the beats that I just programmed. However, the computer has tightened up my playing. It's moved it much closer to the click.
Okay.
And that's really important. This became a very distinctive part of the Lin 9000. The next thing I'm going to do is a version of the bass line. Now, I'm not a great keyboard player, so here's a version of the bass line. Okay, it's okay.
It's good.
But it's not good enough. And it's certainly not good enough for this genre of music, where you've got to have the drums and bass absolutely locked together. Once again, I press quantize. And now when you listen back to it, both the drums and the bass are locked together and interestingly locked against that click.
And it sounds just like the record.
It's close enough.
It sounds just like the record to me.
You could program many of your keyboard parts, and there's a couple of other classic things that those records had. They have arpeggiator sounds, so just let me show you a few examples of that. Here's a keyboard arpeggiator sound, which is a very fast pulsing beat. Put them all together and you get a version of Spin Me Round. Imagine you're in the studio, you've got your Lin 9000 with all these parts playing, but you've also got the Fairlight in the studio, which is the first major sampling machine. The two are not talking to each other, and this is a big problem for production, is how you make the two things run in sync. You've just heard how tight the drums and bass are against their own internal click.
Because they're all being played by the Lin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now you've got a load of stuff playing back on the Fairlight, including some great samples, the slap bass and things like that, which are used on the record. The two machines are not running together, and this is a big problem, and it took engineers quite a lot of skill to get the two things to talk to each other. So as a short-term solution, what Matt and Mike did was to sample the bits you've just heard into the Fairlight, and that way the Fairlight would effectively spit out the drum parts and the keyboard parts in time with the samples that it was playing back. So then you end up with one giant backing track where everything is super tight, all locked together, and it sounds like this. You spin me right round, baby, right round, like a record, baby, right round, round, round. You spin me right round, baby, right round, like a record, baby, right round.
Whilst Matt and Mike were the ones who recorded with the band in the studio, they stepped aside when it came to the mixing process. More often than not, that was the responsibility of Pete Waterman, along with either Phil Harding, Ian Curnow or Pete Hammond, who worked in adjoining studios. For Dead or Alive, it was Phil Harding.
The longest mix of my life ever was Spin Me Round by Dead or Alive. And I estimate it to be about 36 hours. We had a 10 a.m. start. I'd finished the recording and overdubs that day on Spin Me Round. Early evening we started mixing. And Pete arrived at maybe 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, and basically the studio was in chaos. Pete Burns of Dead or Alive, the singer, openly arguing with Mike Stock and Matt Aitken, and basically Pete Waterman came in and kicked them all out of the studio and said, Phil, you're staying there and we'll carry on mixing it. it also set the mould, which I had done some of this with Pete in earlier incarnations with dance remixes, where we didn't mix in the arrangement that was recorded. So typically it would have been recorded in the sort of radio arrangement of 3 to 4 minutes, but we actually mixed it for the dance floor in the 12-inch format of 6 to 7 minutes. And then from the 12-inch, I would then do a transfer of that onto another half-inch and cut the 7-inch radio version from that 12-inch, but it generally wouldn't be a separate mix.
This way of mixing for 12-inch and then cutting a radio version became a standard working process when they got their own PWL studios. The stock Aitken and Waterman team was fully taking shape, so having written and produced hits for Divine and Hazel Dean and steered Dead or Alive song to #1, they looked to expand on their success. David Howells, who became the managing director of PWL, was intrigued by the way they worked together, which was driven by Pete Waterman's understanding of pop.
Because Pete is not a musician, he doesn't talk in muso terms. He talks in visual terms. First of all, he would come up with a title, which for many people in songwriting is the key to everything. And then he'd use a visual description to tell how he would like to see the song develop. So often he'd quote a current record in terms of its rhythmic content and say, so-and-so's in the charts with this, that sound works really well, I think it could work in this vein. And then he'd say things like, I see a cottage in the country, surrounded by a white picket fence, and roses round the door. And you'd wonder, where on earth is this going? And Mike would then say, oh, you mean something like this, and then he'd play some romantic chords. And the connection would be made and they'd move forward. So that was how he articulated his ideas. Mike and Matt got it, transferred that into musical terms.
Their later sound was far removed from the high-energy sound of their past. Mike Stock took inspiration from the men behind the SOS band that Pete had played to them when first met.
I never had a music lesson in my life, and there's a certain flavour in pop music chords, particularly that came out of America, and Jam and Lewis were great exponents of that kind of soulful juxtaposition of chords. And I'd stumbled on this years before, but that was what Jam and Lewis did in a song called Just Be Good to Me, which we all loved. Matt had a bit more of a technical background in music because he had music lessons and piano lessons as a kid. So, sometimes I did the wrong thing, technically. But you actually broke through a few barriers because you accidentally hit something that worked. But we certainly looked at Jam and Lewis when we were doing Princess.
Princess was very left field, although we had done, I think, the 3 Degrees before that, but we hadn't gone into the sort of R&B area. But it was a nice change for us, because by that time we'd had a year and a half of Ricky Ticky and things going da-da-da-da-da. And we had a keyboard player who was with us at the time called Andy Stennett, who was much more articulate than us musically, all the jazz inversions and everything. Andy played the bass free time and put on the pad, and then I came in later and put the picky guitars on it and everything. And there was this girl called Desiree who'd been doing BVs with us, and she had a terrific voice on her own when she was just ad-libbing, and she ended up having a go at this, and that was it.
Say I'm Your Number One was released on the Supreme label, run by Nick East, and the record was a financial lifesaver for the PWL operation.
Matt and Mike knew I was having a hard time, because we bought this studio for sort of 350,000 quid, and boy, we hadn't got through. I've got to tell you, we hadn't got 350 quid. These two guys and my partner knew I needed something to go out and sell. They knew I needed something desperately to turn the tide of what we were doing. They believed in what we're doing. They knew I needed something to lift me to go out and sell. So I think that probably for the first time, we realised how to focus. And they pushed Phil hard into new heights of engineering. They pushed themselves in their musicianship to new heights, because they realised that we had to go suddenly the extra yard. And that same year, number one was the extra yard.
Princess gave the trio the financial stability they needed to survive, and as a professional thank you, the increasingly popular production team and the fledgling record label cemented their relationship with another act, Mel and Kim. Kim Appleby.
The first time we met them was through Supreme Records. Up until that point, Mel and I, with a guy called Steve Rowland, had been doing demos in just kind of home studios and just putting 4 or 5 songs together. Covers, of course, the Mary Jane Girls. It was stuff that Mel and I liked, Patrice Rushen at the time. And this went on for about 4 months. And then Steve came to us one day and said that he knew of a label that had signed Princess, who had had a big hit, as you know, with Sam You're Number One. And he thought that they would be interested in us.
Supreme boss Nick East told Mel and Kim that he wanted the Stock Aitken and Waterman team to work with them. So the girls duly went to the studio, only to be met by Pete, telling them they were too busy and they should come back another day. After a couple of aborted meetings, they eventually met up at the PWL studios, where the production team had a song ready and waiting for them to record.
We sang this R&B track called System. It was called Everyone's Got a System. I think a couple of hours later, Pete came in and he said, OK, let's all go down the pub. Because they'd never met us, didn't know nothing about us. We all went down the pub, I think it was about 8 of us, and they just started throwing questions at us. So where do you live? And we were like, Hackney, East London. So what do you do in your spare time? And we were all like clubbing, playing music. And I think, to be honest with you, they'd never met girls like us. We were very cheeky, we had an attitude, huge laughs, very, very lively girls. And to cut a very long story short, at the end of the evening, we said our goodbyes, and we were really excited, Mel and I, because we'd recorded our first track. About a week later, I got a call from Nikki saying that Stock Aitken and Waterman had scrapped the track. Mel and I were devastated. We thought it was because we didn't deliver the right vocal or they didn't like us. But Nick assured us that Pete had said that the track wasn't tough enough for us. Because I think after taking us to the pub, there was no time beforehand to get to know each other. We just went straight in, sang in the control room. But I think after taking us to the pub and getting to know us, apparently Pete went back to the studio and he said, kill the track. We need something tough for these girls. It needs to be tough. So Nick said that they will call us again when they've come up with the track.
One of the things that I wanted to do with them was get across their personality, and Matt and I were blown away with them as people because they were quite wild and they loved it. They thought it was I think for them it was an highly exciting time because they were brought into the studio almost off the street, if you like. They just loved the experience and thought they were going to get somewhere, and I think it was the adrenaline was going. So after the sessions, if you go down the pub with them, I mean, they would just have us all in stitches, falling about all over the place.
We were Mel and Kim. All our frustrations, all our anger, all our dreams, we wrote into Mel and Kim. They were Stock Aitken Waterman personified, which is brilliant. If you think about 3 overweight, overaged men living their fantasies out as 2 women, it was brilliant.
There used to be a tape up there called Jamie, and apparently Jamie walked in one morning and he had had a heavy night and he was still suited up from the night before. He hadn't slept, he had just gone straight to PWL. And everyone was like making fun of him, saying, wow, where you been? You look great. You know, and he stood there, he went, yeah, I'm showing out, ain't I? And Pete apparently went, that's it, showing out, get fresh at the weekend, that's what the girls need.
It's alright, and don't be dining out on foolish dreams every night. Only takes a moment to feel alright.
Showing out was Mel and Kim. It was fun, it was having a good time, and Matt and Mike used a sneaky device on both this and songs such as FLM and Respectable to get across on record exactly what the girls were about.
We'd be talking amongst ourselves, giggling, having a laugh, but little did we know that they were actually recording this stuff, because I think they thought the more of our personality that was stamped on the record, the more it was separating us from anything else that was out there.
Dead or Alive's You Spin Me Round had taken the Stock Aitken Waterman team to #1 as producers, Respectable gave them their first as writers as well, even if the record company couldn't actually see its appeal. Like Stock.
We had the Publison, the French sampling machine, which gave us 30 seconds of sampling, which was, in those days, was fantastic. Get a whole chorus in. You can mess about to your heart's content. So, having recorded the vocals and then having put it, flying them, we used to fly them in off a reel-to-reel, but we flew them in with the Publison to the choruses, but you could trigger it. So, take or leave us is the beginning, but the ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, you could just mess about. So Matt put that on the tape, which we both loved, delivered the record to the record company, and they hated it, absolutely hated it. Pete said to me they want to take it off, and both Matt and I sort of got very upset by that, very angry, and I went back and said, Pete, there's absolutely no way that's coming off. We think it's a hook. But events overtook that, in fact, because we got a call from Nick East in Holland, who was at a club where they were just showcasing this track for the first time with the girls. And he said, don't touch it. The kids love it, it's fantastic.
Whilst there's no denying that the sound Stock Aitken and Waterman developed for Mel and Kim brought the sisters chart success, Kim Appleby became aware that as time went on, their style became more and more pop, and moved away from the harder edge the team had developed, not only for their label mate Princess, but also on the girls' own early recordings. In 1987, this modern version of Motown's Hit Factory had a run of production or mixing hits with Bananarama, Sunita, Pepsi and Shirley, and Sam Fox. Some critics argued that everything sounded the same, that they'd hit on a winning formula and that's all they could do. But Pete and the team found a way to not only keep themselves amused, but also to get one over on their critics.
We were fed up with people saying, can't you do anything else? And we didn't want to do anything else. One night we decided to have a laugh. We got this idea. I think Matt had heard Gary Crowdley talking about these roadblocks for the parties. I had got this Maceo and the Max idea. We had, funny enough, we had a reggae record that we liked, and we liked the earthiness of it. So we literally said, why don't we do this? But I don't think we spent more than 2 or 3 hours on the backing track. And Mike and I and Matt, we looked at each other and it was like, this don't work. So literally, it's a true story. I went and got the trays out the washing machine, the cutlery trays on the track, and we had all the kids in the studio, all came in round the microphone, and we had all the cups and saucers and the knives and forks, and we had them shaking it in the studio to make it sound like it was live. And we had this whole rabble of people singing. I pressed it, got it done in New York, so it looked like it was an import. We brought it in and then realised I'd mastered it at PRT. On the run-out, there was PRT catalogue number. So I had to get a soldering iron and I had to cross out and hide every one of those numbers. Now, what I didn't realise was, of course, that completely made it genuine, because somebody had thought that because it was a bootleg, I'd scratched that number so nobody could trace where it was from.
Roadblock turned the team of hitmakers into chart artists themselves, and this bogus, old-school import managed to fool a portion of both public and industry alike. It certainly made some people see Stock Aitken and Waterman in a different light, especially at a time when they were perceived as the rising stars of manufactured pop. But just 1 month after Roadblock hit the top 40, they entered the charts as the writers and producers of a song that not only became the best-selling single of 1987, but is still considered one of their finest. It was recorded with a new vocalist Pete had heard in a club in Warrington, Rick Astley.
I was in a band called FBI and I was the singer at the time. Pete came to see us in his red leather trousers and his red Jag parked outside. and he was what you would consider to be the London producer to look like and everything. We didn't really know what to make of him or the whole situation, but we were kids, and the idea of getting up and just performing didn't really faze us, because we weren't really frightened of failure, if you know what I mean. It was just kind of like, well, we're doing this because we want to do it. And the fact that obviously we had this producer had come to listen to us and what have you, been dragged up there kind of thing, was a bit odd, but we just kind of went for it. Pete decided that he liked my voice but didn't really like the band and didn't like the idea of me being in a band. He said, look, I want to bring the kid down to London and talk to him about it all and everything. And I kind of said no at first, which might sound brave now, but at the time it just seemed logical. It's just, I don't want to be on my own and be a solo artist. I wanted to be in the band.
Pete Waterman managed to persuade Rick to come to London, and as there were no government grants to nurture recording talent, got him on a YTS scheme as the T-boy, learning all the studio basics, such as how to reset the sound desk and splice recording tape. Rick sat in on all the sessions for Dead or Alive, Bananarama and Mel and Kim. He'd cover overnight recordings and saw every side of the PWL company. And when he moved from one side of the studio glass to the other, from T-boy to vocalist, he learnt how the stock Aitken and Waterman machine really worked.
You would come to the studio, they'd written a song for you, you sat at the desk with Mike, sometimes Matt as well, and they would play the song through and Mike would sing it. There was no vocal on tape. Mike would just sing you the song 4 or 5 times. You'd have the lyrics with him and you'd be going through them and all the rest of it. So I'm listening to this guy sing this song in my ear, thinking, right, okay, fine. And then thinking, no, I've got to do the way I sing, I've got to go and do that. One thing that I think most singers don't really, I don't think most of the people I know anyway, we don't really appreciate is we don't hear the voice the way that other people do, I don't think. I think producers can hear, they're not even warmed up yet, they're not even close. Whereas oneself, you kind of think, no, I'm good, I'm rocking, everything's fine. But a producer can hear, you know what, let's just keep him at it, let's just keep rolling it, because it's warming up, it's opening up, we're getting there. I think that, again, is really frustrating for people who haven't sung in studios a lot, because they kind of think, what was wrong with the first take? And there isn't anything wrong with it, it's just that there's probably another 10 or 15% warmer, more open, just better that the producer can hear.
Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down, never gonna run around and desert you, never gonna make you cry, never gonna say goodbye, never gonna tell a lie and hurt you.
Rick Astley's voice was not a questionable factor. It was very soulful, but it did cause a problem for his first single, Never Gonna Give You Up. Whilst the song has remained one of the team's most popular hits, it had been bubbling away in various forms for the best part of 6 months before it was released.
I remember myself kind of hearing whispers and different things about why they didn't just put Never Gonna Give You Up out. And I remember that RCA pressured them a lot, I remember that. And they weren't ready to release it because they didn't think it was right. And I really liked it, I really loved it. When I kind of did the vocal, I remember the programming for it was totally different, the bass line was totally different. It sounded more real, it was more realistic instruments. None of the instruments were real, but it sounded more real. They did it all on a thing called a Fairlight, which obviously was at the time the most expensive bit of kit you can possibly buy. That had fantastic sounds in it, and you could make things sound like real drummers, and because they were real drummers and real bass players that they'd been recorded and stuck in this machine, you could get it to spit it out however you wanted it, kind of thing.
Mike Stock.
We knew we had a song and we knew we had a singer. After Rick had sung it, it was obvious, great powerful voice. The difficulty for us was that we didn't want him to sound like Mel and Kim or Bananarama or Dead or Alive. So Matt and I were always on the search, when we got the song down, of the suit of clothes, if you like, that suited or typified the singer we were working with and made it stand out from the rest. I think we probably worked longest on that track than any other of the pop hits that we had, just to find something that we thought sounded a bit different. Because the song was a sort of a chord progression I've used quite a number of times, which I loved. It had tension in it. But eventually we ended up with the Colonel Abraham's Trapped sort of bass. That was from 85, I think. We'd always quite liked it. It's not the same notes and it's not the same anything else, it's just it has the same driving impulse behind it, which was not standard fodder for Stock Aitken and Waterman at the time.
The first time I heard the version that became the actual version for Never Gonna Give You Up, I was a bit freaked out because they kind of they'd simplified it and they'd made it more in your face, basically. I'd heard as well, because one of my best friends was one of the engineers there, I knew that a lot of talking had been going on about my voice. And I think I also took it the fact that I looked about 12, but perhaps sang, as they described it, like a black guy from Louisiana or what have you. They were a bit worried about that as well. But obviously it was more probably to do with the actual sonic sound of how my voice fitted into the record. It's a bit odd, really, to look back at certain things like that, because the way they used to work was so fast and so quick that it's a bit odd to think that, in a way, it almost took them 6 months to come up with the right formula for really believing that they could have a hit with that record. I'm sort of grateful that they did, because they very easily could have just binned it and just sort of said, look, let's not bother, let's write something else. And to be fair, that record started my career, and if I'm ever stopped in the street, that's the one somebody remembers, you know, so I'm really glad that they persevered with it and got it right.
When the Hollandosia Holland team were writing and producing for Motown in the 1960s, they'd often try out the same song with a number of different artists. And thanks to the emergence of multi-track tape recording, they'd often use the same backing track provided by the Funk Brothers. Whilst that was still an option in the 80s, technology meant you could now do things the other way around. They'd found their singer in Rick Astley, but the original arrangement didn't match the voice. The emerging digital technology meant you could either scrap the whole backing track and start again, or just take the parts of your existing version that you liked, and then experiment with the rest until you got exactly what you were looking for. And technology, through programming on equipment such as the Lin 9000 and the Fairlight, gave the opportunity to move a song in a completely different direction.
Ian Kerner was a guy who did a lot of the programming on the original track of that. And I loved it. I made tea and got him his biscuits and everything, because they just bought this Fairlight like 50, 60 grand's worth, or probably 150 grand's worth at the time, I can't remember. He was sat in this little, which I regard as a little studio then. Studios have become a bit more like that now because of more programming and stuff, but it didn't have a big desk in it or anything like that. It was just this bunch of machinery with this kind of wizard sort of person, Ian, playing away.
And Ian Kerner joined Steve Levine in his studio recently to demonstrate both the nature of a programmer's work and his contribution to Rick Astley's worldwide #1.
Originally it started with, literally on my first day there, Pete walked down and said, "Here's the first black Fairlight in the country, lad," which I'd never used before in my life.
And that was put into a dedicated room, and this was a brand new generation Fairlight, wasn't it?
This was a Series 3. Pete was very proud of his new Fairlights, the only one that was that colour. It actually had a major influence on the sound they made for quite a time. He presented me not only with the Fairlight and the manual, but he said, I think it was Alexander O'Neill, he said, there's an Alexander O'Neill record and a Sybil record. He said, I want those chords on that rhythm, about 2 o'clock, or something. It wasn't exactly those chords or that rhythm. It was just, we had a phrase, allowing it to influence us. So we literally just got your head inside what made those chords and those records tick, and then jumped onto the Fairlight, scrabbling with the manual on one side, and just put together the bones of the track as you hear it. The string line and the brass line. It was a completely different drum track and bass line. Printed it onto multi-track, went upstairs, and then they stripped away the backing effectively once they'd written the song on top, and replaced the rhythm track and the bass and various other elements. But the brass and the strings remained, but the rest was what they did to it, effectively, using things like the bass line from Colonel Abrahams, which put a completely different slant on the record and made it what it was.
It's because this new generation of Fairlight was quite a lot more powerful than the previous generations, both sonically better, and it had a big, large, extensive library, and part of that library was this famous string library that it had, and you used those quite a lot, and those became almost trademark PWL sounds, didn't they?
The strings certainly did, I think. I'm going to give you an example here, as we used on the Rick record. Okay, here it is in 1 octave. But on the record, it was actually done in 2 octaves together, as you're going to hear here. And there was also a brass part that went to complement those strings. That was the first riff, and here's the second riff, which happens at bars sort of 4 and 8 in the chorus. And put it together, it sounds like this.
At the time, this was quite revolutionary stuff, to actually have orchestral samples in a computer-based system. We take it for granted now because modern laptops have more power than the Fellite actually had, but it was revolutionary at the time, wasn't it?
At the time, it was unthinkable. It was revolutionary to have that much at your fingertips. And I think that's why Pete was so made up by it, because he could see that it was going to change the face of the records we made forever.
Never Gonna Give You Up reverberated right around the world. It was the UK's best-selling single of 1987 and #1 from Chile to Norway and America to Australia, where it caught the ear of one of their most successful TV exports of the time, Neighbours actor Jason Donovan.
For me, personally, I became particularly fascinated by Stock Aitken Waterman in Melbourne, listening to Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up. It was one of the records that I could say changed my life, and still does sound fantastic.
The success of Neighbours on BBC One meant Jason flew over for a promotional tour of the UK, and to capitalise on his popularity within the show, there was also a meeting with the team behind Rick Astley.
Within that trip was the same time I recorded Nothing Can Divide Us, which was also a song I believe, as history has sort of shown me, talking to Mike and Matt and Pete, was a song destined for, or was a reject of Rick Astley's.
I wasn't ever saying that the song wasn't capable of being a hit, because to be honest, I don't really think Matt, Mike and Pete, as I remember it, I don't think they ever wrote anything that wasn't a hit, because to be honest, I don't think they ever got to that point, because they would just scrap it, but they'd scrap it within 3.5 minutes, you know. There you go, subliminal kind of thing there, 3.5 minutes. They'd be sat down and they'd be doing something and they'd go, nah, rubbish. And when they knew they had something, they persevered with it and they made it into a record that was a hit. I wasn't kind of being the big old I am, I've been to America, look at me, I know what I'm talking about. It just didn't feel right to me. It just didn't feel that that's the next record I want to put out. And on the one hand, people can say, well, you should have kept your mouth shut, because it was a big hit for Jason, obviously. But also, in fairness, I also think Jason was at such a peak in his popularity and everything. He's obviously going to have a big hit with almost anything. If it's got a catchy tune like it had, he's going to have a hit with it.
Don't cry, you must have heard some things about me. Made you turn away. Made you have your doubts about me.
So that's Jason Donovan's version of Nothing Can Divide Us, a song that was going to be done for Rick Astley. In fact, he did actually record the vocals for it, didn't he?
Well, we're very fortunate because we actually have those vocals here in the studio. So first of all, let me play Rick's solo vocal.
You can put your faith in me, I would never set you free. Hold your head up high and let everybody see. With love to guide us, nothing can divide us.
Now, the other trick that they used to use in the PWL studio was this very lush female vocal sound, which was Mae McKenna and Miriam Stockley on most of the records. Now, have a listen to this.
You can put your faith in me, I would never set you free. Hold your head up high and let everybody see. With love to guide us, nothing can divide us.
And here's the blend of Rick's lead vocal and the backing vocals.
You can put your faith in me, I would never set you free. Hold your head up high and let everybody see. With love to guide us, nothing can divide us.
And now here's the vocals within the track.
You can put your faith in me, I would never set you free. Hold your head up high and let everybody see. With love to guide us, nothing can divide us.
What's also quite interesting is that these are the very same female backing vocals that are on Jason's actual finished record. So if I move along to the bridge section of the song, you can hear those female oohs and ahs that are backing Jason's lead vocal. So there we have it in the track.
So when did Jason come along then?
Well, they presumably had the track ready to go for him. Rick had previously done the lead vocal, as we've just heard. It was a finished record. They removed Rick's lead vocal and literally replaced it with Jason's vocal. The backing track is identical, all the backing vocals are identical, just like the Motown days. A completely finished track, but just changed the singer.
You can put your trust in me, love will
Divide Us was Jason's debut UK hit and made the top 5 in the autumn of 1988. And as an actor relatively new to the recording studio, he understood what made the song a success for him.
It's about timing. It's really a lot about timing. And let's be honest, Stock Aitken and Waterman were the hottest producers of the time, and I was in the #1 television show in the UK at the time, and that combination was extremely powerful. I think more so because there was a group of producers writing songs for the demographic of people that were watching Neighbours, and it was music for a broad base of people, not just cool Londoners. Of the notion that you don't analyse it. This is just pop music. It's not there. This is not rocket science. Yet really behind it was a science and was an art form.
Part of the strength of both Stock, Aitken and Waterman and PWL as a company was the working practice they adopted, and both Jason Donovan and Rick Astley, very much like Mel and Kim, were part of the extended family. Mixer Phil Harding.
I view Rick and Jason very much as great team guys, in as much as, you know, Jason came in and very much one of the lads came down the pub at 10 o'clock, because we had this Monday to Friday routine. By the way, the mentality, which was great, because the 12 years that I worked at the Marquee, I often worked 7 days a week. It was crazy. So when we started at PWL, Pete set out the regime. Guys, a lot of us family people, we're going to do Monday to Friday, we're going to take weekends off, unless it's really urgent. Because the other thing we used to do is everyone used to down tools at 10 o'clock, no matter who it is in the building. And I thought it was a great rule as well as the weekend rule. Pete would say 10 o'clock, everyone down tools, we go down to the pub, and we all chew over the day.
This working practice may seem at odds with the music industry as a whole, but this was a very self-contained company, with Jason's singles released on their own PWL record label, the final cog in the wheel. They were songwriters, producers and studio owners who'd released recordings on both major and independent labels. But when a certain Australian actress came their way and Pete couldn't get anyone to take her record, PWL's managing director David Howell suggested they did it themselves. PWL as a record label gave them the complete package. Considering Kylie is now one of the top 50 most successful acts of all time in the UK, it nearly didn't happen at all. David Howells takes up the story.
Kylie and her manager Terry Blaney arrived in the country. They came to see me, said hello, did the tour of the studios, and sent Kylie and Terry to their hotel, encouraging them to do some touristy things and just relax for a while, because Pete hadn't given me a time for them to go in the studio. After about 3 days, tempers are beginning to get a little bit frayed on their side, because I can't come up with a date when they're going to walk into this room, and I've only got, I think it's 5 days. I think I've used 3 of them. And I'm pressing Pete to give me a date and a time I can get Kylie in the studio to make this track, which nobody's spoken about yet, so I have no idea what the song is going to be. And eventually it comes to the very last day, and Pete can't be found. He's totally disappeared. Eventually Matt and Mike arrived at the studio slightly later than their normal time, and I went into them and said, look guys, I've got this Australian artist in the country, what time can you start working with her?
I didn't know what he was talking about, and Pete was in Manchester, so I rang him up and said, Pete, have you forgotten to tell me something? So in the end, I mean, all that happened was I came back to the studio and said to Matt, we've got to do something, mate. This girl's sitting here waiting, and we're a bit embarrassed. Pete's forgotten to tell us. So we asked them to go and sit in the room and have a coffee. And I just sort of in my head jumbled up everything I thought I knew about her. But I just quickly had a word with David Howells, and I knew she was 19, I knew she was pretty, I knew she could sing, I knew she was a big star in Australia. And Matt and I started teaming with this idea.
My recollection of it is, and nobody actually knows this definitely, but Pit Stop, who was one of our promotions guys, was in the room. And I said, look, we've got a couple of songs that we've done for Bananarama that we know. And Mike said, no, you can't do that, you know, da-da-da-da-da. And I said, well, look, if we write one in a hurry, it might not be very good. And Pit Stop said, well, she should be lucky as so lucky as to have one of your bad songs. She should be so lucky, I should be so lucky, Bosh. That's the story.
The brilliant thing about Kylie is she's quick, fantastically accurate, and immediate. You sing it out and it comes back. Like I thought Rick was just fantastic to work with and to witness. And I think she had the training as an actress. She learned a script every day. She's very, very quick. Turned it on, and when Matt heard her sing, Matt didn't like her voice because he thought, well, it is distinctive without a doubt, but that to me was the strength, you know. You can hear lots of girl singers and they all sort of blend into one, but when you hear Kylie, you know it's her. So that's what I thought was the strength. And seriously, recorded that song and wrote it, and she was back on a plane in 40 minutes. And we stuck it away then and got back onto what we were doing, which I think was Bananarama.
But despite this dodgy start, it led to a successful partnership where a near instant chemistry was evident between artist and production team, as on this previously unheard take of one of Kylie's earliest hits. That's an early version of Je ne sais pas pourquoi. All the ingredients of the song are there, but it still needed a little something for the final version in order to pass Pete's quality control test. Not just employed on the Kylie releases, but on all the artists they work with, as he completely understood his market.
We chose to put ourselves in a very, very narrow band of music that was actually more rigorous than anything else we did, because what we did was difficult. Because you're only as good as your last record. You know, there is no future. You've got to churn out another hit tomorrow. This is not sitting down where you're sitting with a band that's just sold 10 million albums, so you're automatically going to have 2 more albums at 8 million. This is where you're sending a single that sells 4 million and the artist says, I don't want to work with you again. So, you know, this is pretty brutal.
It was, as their role model Motown had been, a hit factory, a production line of singles with an incredibly fast turnaround. Jason Donovan.
We recorded the vocals for Especially For You in Sydney, and that was an incredibly quick turnaround because, you know, there had to be a mutual agreement between myself and my manager and Kylie's manager, and we both all felt that, well, let's do it, you know, and that just proves to you how quick a record, you know, was turned around. The machine was well and truly oiled at that particular point in time. They literally flew with the tapes out and flew back. I think we probably recorded it from sort of maybe 5 in the afternoon through till 4 o'clock in the morning. She put her vocals down from probably sort of 7 or 8 that night through to midnight, and then I had to be pushed into the studio to do mine, and I think Kylie stayed throughout the night to make sure that the whole thing was finished. That was a song that was a hell of a well-crafted, incredible song, and to this day I think, wow, I was part of something quite incredible with that tune. You've got Kylie and Jason, Are They, Aren't They, Scott and Charlene. You can't help but recognise what someone like David Howells did to keep that process moving along. The distribution process was an incredibly, you know, well-oiled machine and ready for turnover, quick turnover.
But for some, the production line of hits achieved by Kylie, Jason and others also marked the beginning of the end. Mike Stock.
Everything that came out of the studio up till about 1989, Matt, Pete, or I had our fingers on somehow. It was something we'd worked on or been involved with or had approved or thought was worth doing. After that, people were coming in, people were importing cheap stuff from Belgium, and, you know, it became a just another entity.
Whilst this seemingly endless stream of hits during the second half of the 80s meant that some things might have slipped through the quality control net, it did mean that established artists turned to the PWL company to either resurrect a slump in their career or move them in a different musical direction. Cliff Richard, Deborah Harry, Edwin Starr and even Judas Priest all came to PWL, as did a singer who harked back to the quality soul voices they loved, Donna Summer. Steve, can you just sum up what Stock, Aitken and Waterman, along with the PWL company, actually achieved? Was it just a production line of pop hits, or were they an industry role model, do you think?
It was all those things. They were an industry within the industry. They were songwriters, they were musicians, record producers, studio owners who also had some of the best mixing and engineering talent in the country. Of course, let's not forget that started through their remixing, the dance culture. They were pioneers of the 12-inch dance remix. Also, they were label owners. Now, this is really important because the industry today is full of small little labels. Teams of people just like they were, songwriters, producers, engineers, putting their own records out, and I think they were definitely at the forefront of that.
And a final appreciation from one of their most successful acts, Rick Astley.
They did something that producers and writers and artists were too afraid to do, which is be uncool but make the records that people like to dance to. They were comfortable being the uncool guys who sold all those records with those artists and creating that sound that they created for them. I got a really good run at it. Glad that I had my 15 minutes. I would say this, but I think Never Gonna Give You Up is the best song they ever wrote, and I think I got it. Simple as that.
I'm Richard Allinson. You can listen again at bbc.co.uk/Radio 2. The Record Producers was devised by Steve Levine, written and produced by Neil Miners, and is a magnum opus broadcasting production for BBC Radio 2.